The ruins beneath Rosohna had been sealed for a reason. Caleb Widogast understood this now, staring at the thrumming geometric patterns carved into basalt walls that predated even the Kryn dynasty's darkest records. The air tasted metallic, wrong, not the familiar weave of dunamancy that permeated the Zorhasian capital above, but something older. Something that made his carefully organized mind itch with warnings his academic training couldn't quite articulate. "Caleb, buddy, you're doing the thing where you stare at walls and forget to blink," Fjord said, his half-orc frame blocking some of the dancing light from Jester's spiritual weapon, a giant lollipop currently illuminating archaic script that spiraled toward a central door sealed with 3 interlocking mechanisms. "We've been down here for 2 hours. Bo's already catalogued everything for the Cobalt Soul. Maybe we should. These are not Kryn glyphs." Caleb's fingers traced the air inches from the stone, not quite daring to touch. His Zemnian accent thickened with concentration. "Not drow. Not giant. Not anything from Exandria's known history. The mathematical precision is extraordinary, 9-dimensional binding theory, if I'm reading this correctly, which suggests the architects understood planar mechanics we've only theorized about. So it's bad touching territory," Beth supplied helpfully, her halfling form perched on a chunk of fallen masonry, crossbow resting across her knees. Her amber eyes, still adjusting to having her original body back, tracked the shadows beyond their light sources with practiced paranoia. "Great. Love that. Let's definitely not touch the scary dimensional math door. It's so pretty though." Jester pressed closer, her blue tiefling features lit with genuine wonder as she pulled out her sketchbook. "Look at how the symbols move. They're like dancing. Caduceus, do you see this? It's like when you do the beetle thing with the tea leaves, but fancier." Caduceus clay emerged from the darkness where he'd been communing with the moss growing in impossible patterns along the ceiling. The furbolg's pink hair seemed to absorb and reflect the eldritch glow, and his expression carried that peculiar mix of serenity and concern that usually preceded either profound wisdom or deeply troubling revelations. "The Wild Mother is quiet here. Not absent, but hesitant. Like she's standing at the edge of a cliff she doesn't want to look over." He produced a pinch of tea leaves from his pouch, let them fall. They didn't drift naturally, they traced geometric patterns before settling. "That's not good." "Nothing about this is good," Beauregard muttered, her monk's awareness cataloging exit routes, structural weaknesses, the fact that Yasha had been unusually quiet since they descended into these ruins. The Aasimar barbarian stood near the sealed door, skeletal wings partially manifested, black and white feathers trembling. "Yush. You okay?" "There are voices on the other side," Yasha said softly, her deep voice carrying an edge that made everyone's hands drift toward weapons. "Old voices. Angry. They're saying," she tilted her head, white eyes distant. "They're saying, finally." The door's 3 seals pulsed in response to her words, crimson, emerald, gold. Each one bore a different symbol, a serpent consuming its tail, an eye weeping blood, a broken crown wreathed in thorns. "Okay, new plan," Fjord stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward the star razor at his hip. His sailor's instincts, honed by years navigating worse than just ocean storms, screamed at him to back away. He'd felt this kind of wrongness before, in Ukeotoa's temple, in the corrupt waters where his former patron had whispered promises and threats. "We seal this back up, report to the Bright Queen, let someone with more firepower and fewer poor life choices handle." The entire chamber shuddered. It wasn't an earthquake. Earthquakes Caleb understood, seismic activity, tectonic pressure, natural phenomena. This was reality flinching. The geometric patterns on the walls blazed with light that shouldn't exist, colors that hurt to perceive, and the 3 seals began to rotate independently, clicking through combinations with mechanical precision. Nobody touched anything. Veth shrieked, even as she raised her crossbow toward threats that didn't exist yet. "We were being good. We were using our words and not touching. It's responding to us," Caleb realized, horror dawning as he traced the flow of energy spiraling through the chamber. His wizard's mind catalogued the signature of multiple magical sources, Jester's divine radiance, his own arcane preparations, Fjord's packed magic even dormant, Caduceus's death-touched nature, Yasha's celestial essence. We're not triggering it, we're fueling it. Our combined magical presence is completing a circuit that's been waiting for. The seals clicked into final alignment. The door didn't open. It dissolved, revealing not another chamber but a tear in space itself, a swirling vortex of impossible colors and screaming winds that pulled with the force of a hurricane made of pure hunger. Caleb managed to cast Feather Fall reflexively, even as the suction yanked all 7 of them forward. Jester grabbed for Veth, Fjord caught Caduceus, Yasha's wings snapped wide trying to provide resistance, Bo's monk training let her twist mid-air to reach for the doorframe. But the doorframe was gone. The ruins were gone. Exandria was gone. They tumbled through dimensions that human minds weren't meant to perceive, through the spaces between spaces where the laws of physics became suggestions and the screaming wasn't external but coming from the fabric of reality itself being forced to accommodate passage. Caleb tried to cast Gravity Sinkhole, to create an anchor, but the weave here was wrong, his spell components responded sluggishly, his mental calculations encountering variables that shouldn't exist. Then they hit ground. Not fell, hit, with the kind of impact that should have shattered bones despite Featherfall's lingering effects. Desert sand exploded around them in a crater of their own making, and Caleb's first coherent thought through the ringing in his skull was that the sky was wrong. 2 moons hung in a purple-tinged atmosphere, and the stars formed constellations that belonged to no astronomical charts he'd ever studied. Sound off. Fjord coughed, spitting sand, his combat training kicking in before his higher reasoning. Everyone breathing. A chorus of groans and affirmatives. Jester sat up, her normally immaculate hair full of sand, staring around with eyes so wide her pupils nearly swallowed the iris. Guys? Guys, where the fuck are we? Language, Caduceus said reflexively, then paused. Actually, no, that's appropriate. Where the fuck are we? In the distance, impossibly massive and architecturally impossible, a castle of grey stone rose from the desert sands. It resembled a skull, not metaphorically, but literally, as if some titan's head had been carved into a fortress. Power radiated from it, making Caleb's magical senses burn with its intensity. And spiraling through the purple sky toward that castle were 3 distinct phenomena, a serpentine shadow kilometers long that blotted out stars, a spreading darkness that unmade light wherever it touched, and a roar that shook the sand itself, the sound of something that hadn't drawn breath in millennia finally free. Yasha's earlier words echoed in Caleb's mind with terrible clarity, they're saying, finally. I think, Caleb said carefully, dusting sand from his coat with trembling hands while his mind raced through dimensional theory and planar mechanics and came up with nothing that fit, we may have made a very significant mistake. Beauregard stared at the skull castle, at the 3 approaching nightmares, at her friends scattered across alien sand beneath wrong stars. She said what they were all thinking, you think? If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. With great power comes great responsibility. The sand began to tremble beneath them. Not from the distant entities approaching the castle, but from something closer. Something beneath them. The geometric patterns that had covered the door in Rosohna began etching themselves across the desert floor, spiraling outward from the crater with their arrival point as the epicenter. Caleb recognized the configuration immediately, a summoning circle, but inverted. Not pulling something through, but marking where something had been released. We need to move, he said, already calculating spell slots and remaining components. Now. They ran toward the skull castle because there was nowhere else to go, and behind them, the desert began to wake. The desert proved more hostile than any terrain the Mighty Nein had traversed in Exandria. Sand that should have been ordinary silica bit at exposed skin like frozen needles, and the heat radiating from the twin moons above defied natural law, simultaneously scorching and cold, as if the atmosphere couldn't decide which physics to follow. Caleb's wizard training catalogued anomalies with every labored step. Gravity felt 40% heavier, his component pouch thrummed with unstable energy, and the weave itself tasted mechanical when he reached for it, like someone had rebuilt magic from blueprints rather than letting it grow organically. "Something's following us," Bo panted, her monk's conditioning the only thing keeping her ahead of the group despite the gravity. She risked a glance backward and immediately regretted it. The geometric patterns had expanded into a web of glowing lines across miles of desert, and shapes were rising from the sand, humanoid but wrong, constructed from crystallized darkness and moving with insectal precision. Lots of somethings. Fjord summoned the Star Razor, its blade igniting with seafoam luminescence that seemed dimmer here, struggling against the alien environment. His paladin senses, attuned to the Wild Mother's presence since abandoning Ottawa, felt her divinity stretched thin and distant, like trying to hear whispers across an ocean. "Castle's our best bet. Walls, defensible position, maybe someone who knows what the hell is happening. The castle that looks like a giant skull of death." Veth wheezed, her shorter legs churning double time to keep pace. "That castle? The evil-looking one where the nightmare monsters are converging? That's our sanctuary." "You have a better idea, I'm all ears." Fjord shot back. "I don't, I'm just pointing out that our decision-making skills remain consistently terrible." Jester's usual boundless energy had dimmed to focused determination, her cleric instincts warning that healing magic would be precious here. The traveler's presence felt muted, as if her god struggled to perceive her across whatever impossible distance separated this world from Exandria. But she could still feel something. A divine architecture underlying reality here, different from the pantheon she knew but no less powerful. The traveler says this place has really old gods. Like, really, really old. He sounds worried, you guys. Artigan doesn't do worried. Fantastic, Bo muttered, leaping over a crack in the desert floor that exhaled purple vapor. Old gods, murder castle, geometry zombies. This is fine. Everything's fine. Yasha ran with skeletal wings half manifested, the Stormlord's lightning crackling weakly around her frame. Her divine heritage marked her as obviously as a beacon, Aasimar weren't subtle, and the pursuing entities seemed drawn to her celestial radiance. She could feel their hunger, their ancient hatred of anything touched by higher powers. They're getting closer. Caduceus, bringing up the rear with surprising speed for someone so committed to serenity, cast Blight behind them without breaking stride. The spell manifested sluggishly, its necrotic energy stuttering before finally catching one of the crystalline pursuers. The creature shattered but didn't die, it reformed, adapting, its structure incorporating the death magic and using it to accelerate. "Oh, that's concerning. They're learning from our spells. Don't cast at them." Caleb shouted, his analytical mind already recalculating strategies. If the entities absorbed and adapted to magical attacks, conventional combat was suicide. They needed to reach the castle, find shelter, regroup with actual intelligence about their situation. His transmutation training screamed at him that everything here was wrong on a fundamental level, matter responded to different rules, energy behaved unpredictably, even time felt unstable, seconds stretching and compressing without pattern. The Skull Castle loomed closer, its architecture now revealing impossible details. The eye sockets were actual windows, the nasal cavity and entrance large enough to swallow houses, and the entire structure seemed carved from single piece of gray stone that predated geology. Towers rose from the cranium like crown points, each topped with braziers burning green flame that cast no shadows. And circling those towers, the three entities they'd released from their prisons had arrived, Serpent, Darkness, and Beast, each one radiating power that made Caleb's magical senses scream. "There are people." Jester pointed toward the castle's base where figures were emerging, humanoids in armor and robes, some riding mechanical creatures that resembled tigers and falcons but moved with technological precision. They formed a defensive perimeter, weapons raised, and even at this distance, Caleb could see they weren't human. Too tall, too perfectly proportioned, skin tones spanning the rainbow from green to blue to orange. Maybe they're friendly. With our luck. Beth checked her crossbow's magazine. 50-50 they try to kill us. The lead figure stepped forward as the Mighty Nein stumbled into range, gasping and sand-covered. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, muscular build wrapped in ornate armor that combined medieval aesthetics with technological precision, circuits visible beneath plates, energy fields shimmering at joints. His skin was deeply tanned, his blonde hair swept back, and across his chest was emblazoned a symbol that somehow commanded attention, a stylized sword crossed with lightning. When he spoke, his voice carried authority tempered with genuine confusion. Travelers, identify yourselves. By what magic do you approach Castle Grayskull during the awakening? His hand rested on a sword at his hip, a magnificent blade that seemed to thrum with its own power, waiting. Speak quickly, for the guardians behind you show no mercy to servants of the unnamed ones. We're not servants of anything except our own terrible choices. Fjord called out, hands raised in a gesture of peace despite still gripping Star Razor. His diplomatic instincts kicked in automatically. This man had the bearing of someone accustomed to command, someone who could be reasoned with if approached correctly. We're travelers from another world, displaced by accident. Those creatures pursue us, but we didn't summon them. A woman emerged from behind the blonde warrior, her skin a striking green, her armor a fusion of military functionality and mystical symbology. Her eyes, solid yellow without pupils, assessed the Nein with tactical precision. Man-at-arms, they carry the resonance signature. The seals broke because of them. Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. The sorceress sensed the dimensional breach at the moment of unsealing. These are the catalysts. We didn't mean to. Jester blurted out, her natural honesty overriding any attempt at strategic ambiguity. There was a door, and it started opening by itself, and then we were falling through space, and now we're here, and everything's wrong, and the traveler can barely hear me, and those things are going to kill us. Her words tumbled out in a rush, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, not from fear but from the overwhelming wrongness of being cut off from her god. The blonde warrior's expression shifted, calculation replacing suspicion. He'd seen genuine confusion before, knew the difference between enemies and victims of circumstance. His hand left his sword hilt. Man-at-arms, form defensive positions. Tila, tell the sorceress we have the dimensional travelers. They'll need sanctuary inside Grayskull's walls before the crystalline entities reach them. They didn't attack immediately. They surrounded the group in a perfect circle, their forms now visible in horrible detail, humanoid frames constructed from living geometry, faces that were equations made flesh, bodies that existed in more dimensions than three-dimensional beings should perceive. And they spoke, their voices the sound of glass breaking in reverse, reforming into words. Catalysts must return, to seal, what cannot be sealed. Caleb's blood froze. They weren't hunting the Nein to kill them. They needed them alive. They want to use us to reseal the gods. We're the keys. Incorrect, the entities chorused. You are the locks. The doors. The price of opening. You will seal or you will become the seal. This is law. Yasha's barbarian instincts overrode her usual gentleness. She roared, rage channeling the Stormlord's distant fury, and her skeletal wings exploded outward with divine radiance that actually made the entities recoil. You don't get to decide what we become. The blonde warrior moved with speed that shouldn't exist in someone so large. His hand grasped the sword at his hip, and as he drew it, the weapon transformed, growing, blazing with power, becoming something that was part blade and part conduit for cosmic force. He raised it overhead and his voice shook the desert, by the power of Grayskull. Lightning struck from clear sky. Energy that wasn't lightning but something more fundamental wrapped around the warrior, and his form changed. Muscles expanded, armor transformed, and the power radiating from him suddenly registered on Caleb's magical senses as divine adjacent but different. Not channeled from a god but drawn from the planet itself, from the castle, from the very foundation of this world's reality. I have the power. The transformed warrior, no longer just a man but something approaching demigod status, brought his sword down in an arc that split the desert. Energy cascaded outward, shattering the circle of crystalline entities, buying them precious seconds. He turned to the Nein, and his eyes held ancient wisdom despite his youthful face. Inside. The sorceress will explain. But know this, travelers. You have awakened Serpos the Serpent, the Unnamed One of Shadow, and Gygor the World-Breaker. If you open their prisons, you will help us seal them again, or Eternia dies. Fjord met those eyes and saw no room for negotiation. We'll help. We fix our mistakes. Then run. They ran through the nasal cavity entrance of Castle Grayskull, and behind them, the sky began to scream. Castle Grayskull's interior defied every architectural principle Caleb had ever studied. Corridors bent in directions that shouldn't exist, chambers opened into spaces too large to fit within the skull's exterior dimensions, and the stone itself pulsed with ambient energy that his wizard senses registered as simultaneously technological and mystical, as if someone had fused arcane theory with engineering precision and created something entirely new. The walls were lined with crystalline circuits that glowed with soft green luminescence, and everywhere, there were symbols. Not the chaotic geometric patterns from the ruins beneath Rosohna, but deliberate iconography, swords, orbs, serpents divided and bound, eyes sealed shut, crowns broken and remade. The warrior who transformed, he'd powered down during their sprint inside, returning to his baseline impressive but human form. Led them through winding passages with the confidence of someone who'd walked these halls for years. His green-skinned companion, Tila, maintained rear guard with a weapon that resembled a staff but hummed with contained energy. Behind them, the massive jawbone entrance sealed with a grinding of stone on stone, cutting off the howling wind and the sound of crystalline entities hammering against barriers. Man-at-arms, status on the perimeter. The warrior didn't slow his pace, his voice carrying the clipped efficiency of battlefield command. A stocky figure in mechanical armor jogged alongside them, his mustache and weathered features suggesting decades of combat experience. His armor was a masterwork of function over form, panels that could reconfigure, tools integrated into gauntlets, a helmet that flickered with sensor displays. North and east walls are holding, Adam. The Guardians are adapting to our defenses, but they're not pressing hard. They're waiting for something. Adam. The name registered in Caleb's cataloging mind as potentially important. The man had called the castle by name, Grayskull, and transformed using its power. There were ritual implications there, a connection between place and person that resembled warlock pacts but felt more legitimate. Consensual. A partnership rather than a bargain. They're waiting for the three gods to finish, Beauregard said flatly, her expositor training reading tactical situations with practiced ease. The crystal things said were keys or locks or whatever. They won't move until the big players make their move. Perceptive. A new voice echoed through the corridor ahead of them, feminine and resonant with power that made every divine caster in the group straighten instinctively. You possess warrior's wisdom, child of distant earth. Come. The throne room awaits, and we have little time for courtesies when worlds hang in balance. The corridor opened into a chamber that stole breath and reason simultaneously. It was shaped like the interior of a massive skull's cranium, vaulted ceiling lost in shadows that moved with their own intelligence, and at the center stood a throne carved from single piece of crystalline material that might have been diamond or might have been something entirely other. Seated upon it was a woman whose presence commanded the space, robed in white and gold, her face obscured by an ornate cobra-headed headdress that seemed alive, swaying gently. Her staff, planted firmly on the stone floor, topped with an orb that contained swirling galaxies or perhaps the future itself. Power radiated from her in waves that made Jester's cleric senses sing with recognition. This was a conduit for divinity, a mortal elevated to cosmic awareness. The Sorceress of Grayskull, Adam said, his tone carrying deep respect. Keeper of the castle's secrets, guardian of Eternia's power. She will have answers. Some answers, the sorceress corrected gently, her voice emanating from everywhere and nowhere. Not all. For you bring questions that predate my own knowledge, travelers from the world called Exandria. She tilted her head, and though her face remained hidden, Caleb felt the weight of her gaze settling on each of them in turn, assessing, measuring, understanding in ways that made him profoundly uncomfortable. Yes, I know your world's name. The seals you broke were dimensional locks, and in breaking them, you created a bridge. I have walked that bridge in spirit and seen your gods, the Raven Queen, the Wild Mother, the Storm Lord, even the Traveler hiding at the edges of your pantheon. Curious deities for a curious world. Caduceus stepped forward, his usual serenity strained but intact. Death clerics learned early to stand in the presence of power without flinching. You said we awakened 3 gods. We didn't intend to. We were exploring ruins, and the door opened itself. Intention matters little to ancient magic, the sorceress replied. The Preternia seals were designed by the elders, beings who preceded even Grayskull's construction, to contain 3 entities too dangerous to destroy, too fundamental to banish. Serpos, first of the snake men and progenitor of their race, whose venom corrupts reality itself. The Unnamed One, a shadow that existed before light, which feeds on hope and transforms worlds into eternal night. And Gygor, the World-Breaker, a beast of such primal fury that his footsteps trigger earthquakes and his roar shatters mountains. She paused, letting the weight of those descriptions settle. The elders bound them using a lock that could only be opened by the combined resonance of 7 distinct magical signatures acting simultaneously in precise harmony. Fjord's tactical mind connected the dots with sinking dread. 7 of us. 7 different types of magic. He gestured to the group. Warlock turned paladin, 2 clerics with different domains, a wizard, a monk using ki, a rogue with minor magic, a barbarian with celestial heritage. We're not just keys. We're the only combination that could have opened those seals. Precisely. The sorceress's staff tapped once against stone, and the orb atop it flared. Images materialized in the air, holographic projections showing the desert, the skull castle, and 3 massive forms converging. The serpent was kilometers long, scales that reflected no light, eyes like dying suns. The shadow was formless yet absolute, a hole in reality that unmade whatever it touched. The beast resembled no creature from any world, feline and reptilian and something entirely other, its body covered in armor that might have been natural or might have been grafted on eons ago. They converge on Grayskull because this castle contains Eternia's greatest power source. The strength that allows Adam to transform, the magic that maintains dimensional stability, the force that keeps our world from tearing itself apart. If they claim it, they will remake Eternia into Preternia, the age before reason, before hope, before life as we understand it. Yasha's wings trembled, black and white feathers rustling. Can we seal them again? Perhaps. But not easily, and not without cost. The sorceress gestured, and new images appeared, complex ritual diagrams that made Caleb's transmutation expertise feel inadequate. The original sealing required the elders to sacrifice their physical forms, becoming pure energy bound into the dimensional locks. To replicate that feat, we would need 7 willing souls to anchor the ritual, channeling sufficient power to reforge the seals while the gods are weakened and contained. Weakened how? Veth asked, already calculating odds and not liking the math. Because those things looked pretty damn strong from where I was running. Man-at-Arms stepped forward, his mechanical armor whirring softly. He-Man's sword channels the power of Grayskull. It can wound them, perhaps even kill them if wielded with sufficient force. But alone, even He-Man cannot face 3 Preternia gods simultaneously. He would need support, tactical advantages, and time. He-Man. Jester's artistic mind latched onto the name with curiosity cutting through fear. Is that you? She pointed at Adam. That's a really good superhero name. Did you pick it yourself, or did someone give it to you? Is it because you're a man, or is it like, symbolic? Despite the apocalyptic situation, Adam's lips quirked with amusement. It's complicated. I am Adam, Prince of Eternia. But when I draw the sword of power and speak the words, I become He-Man, champion of Grayskull. 2 identities, 1 purpose. A very showy purpose, came a new voice from the chamber's shadows, dripping with theatrical villainy and barely contained glee. A figure emerged, skeletal face that was either mask or actual exposed skull, yellow eyes blazing with malevolent intelligence, robes of purple and armor of dark metal. He carried a staff topped with a ram's skull, and his presence radiated dark magic that made Caleb's hair stand on end. How wonderful! The fools who opened the seals have arrived to witness the end of everything. I am Skeletor, master of evil, and I must thank you, dimensional travelers. Your incompetence has given me the opportunity I've sought for decades. Tila's energy staff snapped to ready position. How did you breach Grayskull's defenses? I didn't. Skeletor's laughter was a sound like breaking glass. The sorceress invited me. Didn't you, my dear? Because even you understand that stopping 3 Preternia gods requires all of Eternia's power, light and dark, heroic and villainous, pathetic friendship nonsense and glorious ambition. The sorceress's staff tapped again, acknowledgement without approval. An alliance of necessity. Skeletor possesses knowledge of dark magic essential to the sealing ritual. And despite his megalomania, he understands that ruling Eternia requires Eternia to exist. Quite right. Skeletor circled the Mighty Nein like a predator assessing prey, his skeletal grin somehow widening. Can't conquer a world that's been transformed into primordial chaos. Bad for my plans. Worse for my complexion. He stopped in front of Caleb, sensing a kindred analytical mind. You, wizard. You understand dimensional magic, yes. Then you comprehend our dilemma. The seals must be rebuilt from both sides, your world and mine. 7 channelers here, and 7 anchor points in Exandria, or the dimensional bridge collapses and traps these gods in the space between spaces, where they'll eventually break through somewhere else. Caleb's blood ran cold. We can't access Exandria. The portal closed behind us. Then we open it again. Skeletor's tone suggested this was obvious. During the ritual. While He-Man and whatever pathetic excuse for warriors you people manage to scrounge together are keeping 3 gods distracted. Simple. Except for the part where any mistake results in total dimensional collapse and the extinction of both our worlds. Beauregard looked at her friends, saw the same exhausted recognition in their eyes. We're going to die here, aren't we? Probably. Skeletor agreed cheerfully. But imagine how heroic you'll look in the histories. The Mighty Nein, dimensional travelers who helped save Eternia. Very inspiring. Makes me want to weep tears of evil joy. Fjord drew a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and met Adam, He-Man's eyes with the determination of someone who'd already betrayed one patron and refused to fail again. We opened the seals. We'll help close them. What do you need us to do? The sorceress rose from her throne, and power rippled through the chamber like heat waves. First, you must survive. Serpos, the Unnamed One, and Gygor will reach Grayskull within hours. They will breach these walls, and they will seek to consume the power here. He-Man can wound them. Skeletor's dark magic can bind them temporarily. But you, Mighty Nein, must learn to channel Eternia's power through your own magic, to adapt your spells to this world's laws, to become weapons capable of hurting gods. And how exactly do we do that? Veth asked. The sorceress's staff pointed toward a doorway that hadn't existed moments before, revealing a descending staircase that glowed with ominous promise. By facing the trials of Grayskull. The same trials that forged He-Man himself. You have 3 hours to master what should take years. I suggest you don't waste time. Caleb looked at his friends, exhausted, displaced, terrified, but still standing. Still together. He thought of Exandria, of the people they'd left behind, of the chain reaction their mistake might trigger across dimensions. Then we start now. They descended into Grayskull's depths, and behind them, the castle's walls shuddered as something massive struck them with the force of continental drift. The gods had arrived. The trials of Grayskull existed in a space that defied Caleb's understanding of dimensional magic. The staircase had descended for precisely 144 steps, he'd counted reflexively, but emerged into a chamber that couldn't possibly exist beneath the castle. It was vast beyond measure, its ceiling lost in artificial stars that formed constellations spelling out words in languages predating speech itself. The floor was polished obsidian that reflected not their current forms but echoes of who they might become, and standing in the chamber's center was a crystalline structure shaped like a sword thrust into stone. The trials adapt to those who face them, the sorceress's voice echoed from everywhere, though she hadn't descended with them. Apparently, cosmic guardians had better things to do than babysit dimensional refugees through magical boot camp. Each of you will face what you most need to overcome. Pass, and you will channel Eternia's power as naturally as breathing. Fail, and you will be consumed by it, transformed into another guardian construct, bound to serve Grayskull until the stars die. That's a bit extreme, Caduceus observed mildly, though his grip on his staff tightened. Is there, like, partial credit? A nice participation certificate? The gods do not offer partial credit, came the reply. Begin. The crystalline sword blazed with light, and the chamber fractured into 7 separate spaces. Caleb felt reality twist around him, felt his friend's presence disappear as individual trials manifested. He stood alone in a recreation of his childhood home in Blumenthal, not as it had been before the fire, but during. Flames crawled up walls, smoke choked the air, and through the inferno stumbled 2 figures he'd spent years trying to forget. His parents, burning, screaming his name. Screaming the name Bren, the boy he'd been before trauma and guilt had rebuilt him into Caleb Widogast. Illusion, he whispered, trying to convince himself even as his hands trembled. The Scourger training, Trent Ickathon's conditioning, all of it roared back with visceral intensity. Not real. This is a trial of will. But the heat felt real. The screams sounded real. And when his mother's burning hand reached for him, his father's eyes meeting his with betrayal and confusion, Caleb's transmutation magic responded instinctively. Trying to reshape the flames, to undo what he'd done, to fix the unfixable. His spell failed. Not because he lacked power, but because Eternia's magical framework rejected his attempt. The energy fizzled, stuttered, and backfired, sending feedback through his nervous system that dropped him to his knees. This world's magic operated on different principles, required different mental frameworks, demanded he approach spellcasting not as manipulation of the weave but as partnership with a living system that had its own will. You cannot change the past, a voice spoke, his own voice, but older, wiser, more broken. A version of Caleb Widogast stepped from the flames, untouched by fire, carrying the weight of every decision he'd ever made. You can only decide what the past makes you. Here, in this world of cosmic forces and ancient powers, your guilt is irrelevant. Your trauma is irrelevant. What matters is this: will you burn forever, or will you burn for something? Caleb looked up at his alternate self, at the trial wearing his face, and understood. Eternia's magic didn't care about personal redemption arcs or psychological complexity. It cared about purpose, about will crystallized into action. He'd been trying to transmute the flames using Exandrian methodology. Imposing his will upon reality. Here, he needed to ask reality to cooperate. To offer himself as conduit rather than controller. He extended his hand toward the fire, not to reshape it but to understand it. His consciousness touched Eternia's magical substrate and felt it respond, curious, ancient, willing to teach if he was willing to learn. The flames weren't enemies to be defeated but forces to be directed, channeled, given purpose beyond destruction. Burn, Caleb whispered, and this time his magic sang. Not transmutation but something new, a hybrid of his arcane training and Eternia's cosmic technology. Fire spiraled around him in controlled vortices, beautiful and terrible, and when he stood, the illusion of his parents dissolved. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer chains. Just fuel. I burn for them. For everyone I failed to save. And I will burn through gods if necessary. The trial accepted his answer. Reality shattered like glass. In another space, Fjord faced ocean that was an ocean. It resembled the waters where Uk'otoa had imprisoned him, whispered to him, corrupted him. But the voice rising from these depths wasn't his former patron. It was older, more alien, a presence that made Uk'otoa seem like a child playing at godhood. Serpos, the Great Serpent, surfaced with eyes that had witnessed the birth of worlds. Warlock, the god's voice was tectonic plates grinding. You abandoned your patron. Betrayed your pact. What makes you think this new goddess, this wild mother, will not abandon you when convenient? Gods use mortals. This is law. Fjord gripped the star razor, feeling the wild mother's blessing struggle to reach him across dimensions. Serpos was right about one thing, gods did use mortals. He'd learned that lesson hard with Uk'otoa. But the wild mother had never demanded. Never threatened. She'd offered partnership, and when he'd needed freedom to choose his own path, she'd granted it. Maybe she will, Fjord said, meeting those ancient eyes without flinching. Maybe I'll disappoint her, or she'll decide I'm not worth the effort. But that's the difference between you and her. She gave me the choice. You're just another Leviathan who thinks power means ownership. He raised the star razor and struck the water. Not attacking Serpos, that would be suicide, but channeling the blade's energy into the ocean itself, asking Eternia's forces to recognize him as he was, a man who'd chosen his own chains over gilded servitude, who'd rather drown free than swim in service to monsters. The ocean exploded into light. Serpos shrieked, more surprised than hurt, and the trial space collapsed. Jester found herself in a world drained of color, gray landscape, gray sky, gray versions of her friends standing frozen like statues. The traveler's presence, already muted, vanished entirely. Her connection to divine magic, the thing that made her her, was gone. Panic clawed at her chest. Without the traveler, without her god's chaos and creativity, who was she? Just a blue tiefling girl who drew dicks on things and tried too hard to make everyone happy. The gray world pressed down on her, and the unnamed one's voice whispered from shadows that were deeper than gray, darker than absence. Without your god, you are nothing. Without color, the world loses meaning. I am the truth of existence, empty, purposeless, inevitable. That's bullshit, Jester said, her voice cracking but defiant. She pulled out her sketchbook, gray now, lifeless, and her paints, which had become ashen dust. But her hands still worked. Her imagination still functioned. And maybe, just maybe, the traveler had taught her something important. Chaos wasn't about divine power. It was about refusing to accept that gray was the only option. She began to paint. Not with magic, not with divine blessing, but with sheer stubborn creativity. Her fingers mixed the gray dust, found subtle gradations, discovered that even in a world stripped of color, there were infinite shades between black and white. She drew on frozen statues of her friends, adding details, personality, life. She drew doors where no doors existed, windows opening to impossible views, dicks, yes, dicks, because humor was rebellion against hopelessness. Color began to bleed back into the world. Not from divine sources but from her refusal to stop creating. The Unnamed One howled in rage as Jester's art became real, not illusion but genuine transformation of gray into spectrum. Eternia's magic responded to her determination, recognizing creativity as a fundamental force. I'm nothing without my God. Jester laughed through tears. Maybe. But I'm the one who imagined him in the first place. And if I can imagine one God, I can imagine kicking your shadowy ass. The gray shattered. Color exploded back into existence, and Jester emerged from the trial glowing with power that was partly divine, partly artistic, entirely hers. Beauregard's trial was simpler and infinitely worse. She stood in a library, the Cobalt Soul's archives. Watching as every book, every scroll, every piece of accumulated knowledge burst into flames. Centuries of truth, millennia of recorded history, all burning. And standing in the flames was her younger self, angry and drunk and stupid, holding the torch. You're just a fuck-up pretending to be wise, her younger self snarled. You stumbled into the Cobalt Soul by accident. You don't deserve to be an expositor. You're still that angry kid who ruins everything she touches. Bo watched the library burn and realized the trial wasn't asking her to save it. It was asking her to accept that some knowledge could only be gained through loss. The Cobalt Soul taught that truth was sacred, but sometimes truth was painful. She'd never be perfect, never be fully at peace, never completely escape the angry kid she'd been. Yeah, she said to her younger self. I'm a fuck-up. Always will be. But I'm a fuck-up who gets back up, who keeps learning, who refuses to stop trying. She walked through flames that couldn't touch her anymore, grabbed her younger self, and pulled her into a hug. And you know what? That's enough. Eternia's magic surged through her, recognizing the warrior's truth. Perfection was a lie, but persistence was real. Veth's trial showed her two bodies. Her original halfling form and the goblin shell she'd inhabited for years. Between them stood a mirror that asked the question she'd never fully answered, which one was real? She'd fought so hard to reclaim her halfling body, to return to Yeza and Luke as herself, but the goblin had been her too. That fear, that desperation, that scrappy survival instinct, it hadn't disappeared with the transformation curse. I'm both, Veth decided, touching the mirror. The mom and the survivor. The halfling and the goblin. I don't get to pick just one. The mirror accepted her answer and shattered, each fragment reflecting different versions of herself, all real, all valid. Yasha stood before two figures, the Stormlord, radiant and powerful, demanding she embrace rage and strength, and Zwala, her dead wife, begging her to choose peace and gentleness. The trial was cruel in its simplicity, pick one, and lose the other forever. She'd spent so long torn between these identities. The barbarian and the florist, the warrior and the wife. But staring at the choice, Yasha realized something profound. Zwala had loved her rage. The Stormlord valued her gentleness. Neither wanted her diminished. I choose both, she said simply, and her skeletal wings blazed with lightning wrapped in flowers. The Stormlord laughed with approval. Zwala smiled with pride. The trial dissolved. Caduceus faced the Wild Mother herself, or a representation of her, vast and terrible and beautiful. She showed him visions of death, his family's grove overrun, his friends dying in the battles ahead, himself sacrificing everything to seal gods and save worlds he'd never even heard of a day ago. This is the path, the Wild Mother's voice was whined through ancient forests. Death comes for all. Will you accept it? Caduceus smiled his gentle, knowing smile. Death isn't the end. It's just composting. Everything returns to the earth, and everything grows again. Yeah, I accept it. But I also reject it, because death is only part of the cycle. He planted his staff, and flowers bloomed in impossible space. Life. Death. Life again. That's the whole point. The Wild Mother's approval washed over him like rain on parched soil. They reconverged in the central chamber simultaneously, each transformed in subtle ways. Their magic had adapted, hybridized with Eternia's cosmic technological substrate. Caleb's spells now carried geometric precision. Fjord's divine powers hummed with planetary energy. Jester's creativity could literally reshape matter. Bo's ki blazed with truth force. Veth's arrows could pierce dimensional barriers. Yasha's rage carried storm force. Caduceus's necromancy could affect even cosmic entities. The crystalline sword dissolved, and the sorceress's voice returned. Well done. You are now weapons capable of wounding gods. Unfortunate timing, as Grayskull's walls have just been breached. Above them, the castle shook with impact that cracked foundations laid before recorded history. The gods were inside. The ascent from the trial chamber felt longer than the descent, each step carrying them toward sounds that shouldn't exist, reality tearing, stone screaming, and beneath it all, a rhythmic pounding that Caleb's enhanced perception recognized as a heartbeat the size of a mountain. Eternia's magic now sang in his veins like a second circulatory system, geometric and precise, waiting to be directed. He could feel his companions' transformed essences nearby. Fjord's connection to planetary forces, Jester's creative chaos now weaponized, all of them forged into something new by Grayskull's trials. They emerged into devastation. The throne room had been beautiful. Past tense. Now the vaulted ceiling gaped open to purple sky where Serpos coiled, kilometers of serpentine mass wrapped around the castle's upper towers like a python crushing prey. Each scale was the size of a house, reflecting colors that didn't exist in natural spectrums, and where the god's body touched stone, reality corroded. Not destroyed, but regressed, technology reverting to crude metal, refined architecture becoming primitive rock, as if Serpos's very presence dragged matter backward through evolutionary epochs. The Unnamed One had claimed the western wing entirely. No flames, no dramatic destruction. Just spreading absence, a void that unmade light and sound and hope with casual finality. Caleb's enhanced senses could barely perceive its boundaries, and what little he could detect made his transmutation training scream warnings. This wasn't darkness. Darkness was the absence of light. This was the absence of potential, the philosophical concept of nothingness given form and hunger. And Gygor. Gygor was currently locked in combat with He-Man in the castle's courtyard, visible through the throne room's shattered walls. The World-Breaker stood 40 feet tall, bipedal but barely humanoid, feline musculature wrapped in armored hide that might have been natural or might have been grafted on eons ago when the concept of biology was still being invented. 4 arms, each ending in claws that sparked with energy discharge, and a face that combined tiger, dragon, and something from nightmares that predated both. Its roar was physical force, shockwaves that pulverized stone and sent defenders flying. He-Man met it head-on with the sword of power blazing like a star-given edge. The transformed prince moved with speed that defied his massive frame, each strike releasing energy that cratered the courtyard and drove Gygor back step by thunderous step. But the god adapted with each exchange, its armor reconfiguring to deflect angles that had wounded it seconds before, its 4 arms learning He-Man's patterns with terrifying intelligence. Their learning, Beauregard observed, her expositor training cataloging combat patterns even as her monk instinct screamed to join the fight. Serpos is studying the castle's structure. The shadow thing is testing Grayskull's magical defenses. And the big guy is analyzing He-Man's fighting style. They're not just attacking, they're gathering intelligence. For what? Veth had an arrow knocked, her crossbow tracking Gygor's movements, but even she recognized the futility of shooting something that shrugged off He-Man's strikes. What's the play here? They want the castle's power, right? So why the slow approach? The sorceress materialized beside them in a flare of light, her cobra-headed staff crackling with barely contained energy. Blood, golden, not red, seeped from beneath her headdress, and her robes bore scorch marks that suggested she'd already engaged in combat. They seek the power core. Grayskull's heart, the wellspring from which He-Man draws strength, the anchor that maintains dimensional stability across Eternia. If they claim it, they can reshape this world into Preternia, a reality governed by their laws, where chaos precedes order and might makes right without ethical consideration. She gestured, and holographic displays materialized showing the castle's internal structure, a maze of corridors and chambers all leading to a central point deep underground where something pulsed with rhythmic luminescence. We must prevent them from reaching the core while simultaneously preparing the sealing ritual. Skeletor. The villain emerged from shadows wearing his perpetual skeletal grin, but even his theatrical villainy seemed subdued by the scale of threat. The ritual components are being assembled in the lower sanctum. Your dimensional friends need to provide 7 anchor points while I weave the containment matrix. He-Man must weaken the god sufficiently for the seals to take hold. And we must open a temporary portal to Exandria to establish the other side of the binding. Simple. Except for the part where everything has to happen simultaneously while 3 primordial deities are actively trying to kill us all. You know, for a bad guy, you're surprisingly helpful during apocalypses, Jester observed, already sketching protective wards in her notebook, each drawing now manifesting as actual magical constructs thanks to her trial-enhanced abilities. Self-interest, my dear, Skeletor replied cheerfully. Can't rule Eternia if it's been transformed into a prehistoric hellscape. Though I will admit, there's a certain romantic tragedy to our impending doom. We should compose an opera about it. After we survive. If we survive. Man-at-Arms jogged into the throne room, his mechanical armor sparking from impacts, dragging an injured Tila whose green skin had gone pale. Serpos breached the North Tower. The guardians there are down, not dead, but transformed into serpent thralls. They're spreading through the castle, converting our own defenses against us. He laid Tila down gently, and Caduceus was already moving, his death-touched healing now carrying Eternia's geometric precision. I've got her, Caduceus said calmly, his hands glowing with combined necrotic and restorative energy that knitted wounds while purging corruption. The Wild Mother's distant presence channeled through him felt different here, less like divine intervention and more like partnership with planetary consciousness. But Man-at-Arms is right. We can't fight on all fronts. We need to pick our battles. Fjord's tactical mind, honed by years of naval command and desperate combat, assessed their options with brutal efficiency. We split up. He-Man keeps Gygor occupied in the courtyard, that's already happening, so we maintain status quo there. The Sorceress focuses on containing the shadow thing, divine magic seems like our best bet against philosophical nothingness. That leaves Serpos and the converted guardians. The Mighty Nein plus Skeletor's dark magic could potentially. No, the Sorceress's voice carried absolute certainty. Serpos is mine to face. The Serpent God and I have history, our essences are cosmically opposed. Light and ancient darkness, order and primordial chaos. My power can wound it where yours cannot. She turned to Fjord, and though her face remained hidden, he felt the weight of cosmic wisdom assessing him. You carry oceanic divinity, paladin of distant waters. The shadow feeds on hope, yes, but it starves in the presence of absolute conviction. Take your friends, enter the Unnamed One's domain, and hold it at bay while we prepare the ritual. Survive for 1 hour. That is all I ask. Just survive for an hour in the realm of living nothingness, Beauregard deadpanned. Sure. Easy. Love that for us. Yasha's skeletal wings spread wide, lightning crackling between feathers. The Stormlord's distant rage sang through her, eager for battle against entities that predated Storm itself. We've faced worse. Have we, though? Veth countered. I'm genuinely asking. Cognusa was bad, Lucian was terrifying, but those were at least things we could stab. This is conceptual horror. Then we stabbed the concept, Caleb said quietly, his transmutation magic already weaving protective matrices around his friends, geometric shields that would adapt to Eternia's hostile physics. His time in the trial chamber had taught him that this world's magic responded to will crystallized into purpose, and right now, his purpose was simple: protect his family, seal the gods, and get everyone home alive. We've improvised through every impossible situation thrown at us. This is just another Tuesday, but with different cosmic entities. Skeletor laughed, delighted despite circumstances. Oh, I like you people. So pragmatically fatalistic. Very well, since He-Man gets the fun monster fight and the Sorceress gets the dramatic serpent battle, I suppose I'm supporting the dimensional travelers in their suicide mission against existential dread. How perfectly humiliating for a villain of my stature. He gestured with his ram skull staff, and dark energy coalesced into a doorway that led toward the western wing, toward the spreading void. After you, heroes. Try not to get unmade too quickly. I have spells to prepare, and it's terribly inconvenient when living anchors dissolve prematurely. The courtyard shook as Gygor landed a solid hit on He-Man, sending the champion through 3 walls and into the desert beyond. The god roared triumph, but the roar cut short as He-Man emerged from rubble, bloody but unbroken, sword raised and blazing brighter. Their battle joined again with impacts that registered on seismic scales. The sorceress's form began to glow, her staff channeling power that made the air crystallize. I go to face Serpos. Keeper of darkness, meet Grayskull's light. She transformed into pure energy and shot upward through the broken ceiling, her battle cry echoing as she engaged the serpent god in combat that turned the sky into a war zone. Which left the Mighty Nein, one theatrical villain, and one very alarmed man-at-arms staring at the doorway into absolute darkness. For what it's worth, man-at-arms said, He-Man trusts you. He saw something in your eyes during your arrival. Recognition of people who fight not because they're fearless, but because they refuse to abandon their responsibilities. That means something here. He saluted, then moved to join defenders rallying against serpent thralls. 1 hour. We'll hold the line. Fjord looked at his friends, this chaotic, brilliant, traumatized, indestructible family he'd found in Exandria's strangest corners. Jester with her manic creativity, Caleb with his guilt-forged determination, Bo with her truth-seeking fury, Beth with her survivor's pragmatism, Yasha with her gentle violence, Caduceus with his acceptance of death's role in life's cycle. They'd survived hag cults, demon princes, city-eating monstrosities, and their own worst impulses. 1 hour against philosophical nothingness. They'd managed stranger. All right, Mighty Nein, he said, gripping the star razor and feeling the Wild Mother's blessing surge through Eternia's planetary consciousness. Let's go disappoint some ancient gods. They stepped through Skeletor's portal into the Unnamed One's domain, and reality inverted. The western wing had been transformed into something that predated architecture, walls that existed in negative space, floors that were the absence of ground, and hanging in the void that wasn't void was the god itself. Not a form, not a body, but a presence that unmade definition. Where it existed, language failed. Where it moved, concepts dissolved. And when it perceived the Mighty Nein's entrance, its attention was the feeling of every hope you'd ever held simultaneously proven false. Why do you persist? The Unnamed One's voice was every disappointment you'd ever experienced speaking in unison. You cannot win. You cannot even comprehend victory against me. I am the truth beneath your gods' lies, that existence is accident, meaning is delusion, and all light eventually fails. Why struggle when surrender is inevitable? Caleb felt his transmutation magic waver, his carefully constructed mental frameworks cracking under that existential weight. Beside him, Jester's vibrant colors began to gray. Veth's grip on her crossbow loosened. Even Yasha's wings dimmed, and Bo's aggressive confidence stuttered. Then Fjord stepped forward, and his voice carried the absolute conviction of someone who'd already stared into an abyss and chosen to climb back out. Because fuck you, that's why. The star razor ignited with seafoam luminescence channeled through Eternia's planetary core, and the battle for hope itself began. Fighting the Unnamed One was like drowning in philosophy. Every strike the Mighty Nein attempted passed through the god's non-form as if attacking a thesis statement with swords, technically possible but fundamentally absurd. Caleb's geometric spells, enhanced by Grayskull's trials, traced perfect mathematical patterns through the void only to encounter the problem of dividing by zero. The Unnamed One existed in the space where equations broke down, where logic ate itself, where 2 plus 2 equaled the heat death of the universe. It's not physical. Caleb shouted, his mind racing through dimensional theory and planar mechanics while simultaneously trying not to contemplate the existential horror of a being that predated existence itself. It's conceptual. We're not fighting a creature, we're fighting an argument. Then we counter-argue. Jester's hands moved in frantic patterns, her enhanced creativity manifesting as literal rebuttals, painted arguments that took three-dimensional form and collided with the spreading darkness. She drew doors that opened to memories of joy, sketched windows showing futures worth fighting for, scrawled dicks because sometimes absurdist humor was the only sane response to cosmic nihilism. Where her art touched the void, color bled back into reality like ink dropped in water. You say nothing matters. I say everything matters because I decided it does. That's how meaning works, you shadowy asshole. The Unnamed One's attention focused on her, and Jester felt the weight of infinite disappointments pressing down, every time the traveler had seemed distant, every moment she'd failed her friends, every painted smile hiding loneliness. Your conviction is chemical reaction. Your meaning is evolutionary accident. Your God is figment you imagined because acknowledging purposelessness terrified you. Yeah, probably. Jester laughed through tears that evaporated before falling, her defiance burning brighter for admitting doubt. But my imaginary God is still more fun than your edgy nihilism. And you know what? Even if meaning is made up, I choose to make it up. That's the whole point. Her painted constructs exploded with chromatic force, driving the darkness back inches, not much, but enough to prove the Unnamed One could be resisted. Beauregard moved like water through the collapsing space, her monk training adapted to Eternia's physics allowing her to find purchase where ground shouldn't exist. Her fists blazed with truth force, the Cobalt Soul's mandate crystallized into weapon form, and when she struck the void, she didn't aim for the god itself but for the lies it told. You say existence is accident. Prove it. You say meaning is delusion. Show your work. You're just another bully hiding behind big concepts because direct confrontation exposes you as weak. Each strike landed not on flesh but on philosophical premises, and where Bo's truth force connected, the Unnamed One's arguments fractured. It shrieked, not sound but the sensation of certainty crumbling, and shadows recoiled from her assault. Truth is subjective, it hissed. Your certainties are cultural conditioning. Your convictions are neurological patterns that will dissolve when your brain ceases function. Maybe, Bo grinned, feral and furious. But my neurological patterns are currently kicking your non-ass, so I'll take that trade. Veth had stopped trying to shoot the god directly. Instead, she targeted the spaces between, the conceptual boundaries where the Unnamed One's influence met reality's resistance. Her arrows, now capable of piercing dimensional barriers thanks to Grayskull's enhancement, stitched light into darkness like sutures closing wounds. Each shot anchored reality's edges, preventing total dissolution. Caleb. If this thing is an argument, what's the counter-argument? What's the thesis that beats nihilism? Caleb's mind worked frantically, sorting through philosophical frameworks he'd studied at Sorceress Academy before Trent Ickathon had twisted education into trauma. The Unnamed One claimed existence was accident, meaning was delusion, classic existential nihilism. The counter wasn't to deny those premises but to embrace them and choose differently. Absurdism, he shouted, weaving a spell that was half transmutation and half declaration of intent. If existence is absurd and meaning is constructed, then we construct it anyway. That's not weakness, that's the ultimate rebellion. His magic manifested as geometric constructs that didn't attack the void but built within it, frameworks of meaning erected in the face of meaninglessness, structures that acknowledged pointlessness and chose purpose anyway. Where his spells took hold, the Unnamed One's influence couldn't spread. Not defeated, but contained. Defied. Yasha understood the battle on a level her companions couldn't quite reach. She'd spent months lost in darkness, her memories stolen, her identity fractured, serving Oban without will or hope. She knew what it felt like to be unmade, to exist as a void inside your own skin. And she knew the moment of choosing to claw back toward light, not because light was objectively better, but because she'd decided it was worth fighting for. Her skeletal wings spread impossibly wide, and she channeled not just the Stormlord's rage but something deeper. The defiant roar of every being who'd ever stared into oblivion and spat in its face. Lightning didn't strike the Unnamed One, it defined the space around it, creating boundaries, insisting on distinction between existence and absence. "You are not inevitable," Yasha growled, her voice carrying storm force. "You are not truth. You are just another thing that needs killing. And I am very good at killing things." She brought both fists down in a devastating strike that shouldn't have landed on something without substance, but Eternia's cosmic technological magic had attuned to her conviction. The impact created a shockwave of pure assertion, "I exist, therefore you can be fought," and the Unnamed One screamed with the sound of every certainty it had ever shattered now turned back on itself. Caduceus stood at the group center, one hand on his staff, the other spread wide in a gesture of acceptance that bordered on suicidal serenity. His death domain magic, now hybridized with Eternia's forces, didn't attack or defend, it simply acknowledged. "You know what's funny," he said conversationally to a god that embodied existential dread. "Death makes your whole philosophy kind of pointless. If nothing matters because everything ends, then nothing matters, including your need to prove nothing matters. You're fighting really hard to convince us that fighting is meaningless. That's just sad, friend." The Unnamed One's attention swiveled toward him, and Caduceus felt the full weight of its argument, that his family's grove would eventually crumble, his friends would die, his god would fade, and the universe itself would reach heat death where even memory of meaning ceased to exist. "Yup," Caduceus nodded agreeably. "All true. Everything composts eventually. But you know what grows from compost? New life. New meaning. The cycle doesn't care about your philosophy, it just keeps cycling. Kind of beautiful, actually." His magic spread through the void like roots through soil, and where it touched, the Unnamed One's absolutism encountered relativism. Yes to endings, yes to meaninglessness, and also yes to beginnings, yes to constructed purpose. Both could be true. Reality was big enough for contradictions. Fjord had been silent through the exchange, his paladin senses reaching through Eternia's planetary consciousness toward the Wild Mother across impossible dimensional distances. His former patron, Otoa, had taught him about power through domination. The Wild Mother had taught him about power through choice. And now, facing a god that claimed all choices were equally meaningless, he understood the fundamental weapon at their disposal. Skeletor. He shouted toward where the villain maintained the doorway's integrity, his dark magic preventing the void from spreading. "You said the sealing ritual needs 7 anchor points. What if we make them now? What if we turn ourselves into the anchors while we're inside this thing's domain?" Skeletor's skeletal face somehow conveyed surprise despite lacking flesh for expressions. "That's actually brilliant. Suicidally dangerous and likely to kill you all horribly, but brilliant. If you anchor yourselves as the ritual's foundation while saturated in the Unnamed One's essence, the sealing matrix would target the god's conceptual existence directly. But you'd need to maintain your identities while the void tries to dissolve your sense of self. One moment of doubt, one crack in your conviction, and you become part of the seal rather than its creators. So we don't doubt," Fjord said simply, and raised the star razor high. The blade blazed with combined oceanic and planetary power, the Wild Mother's blessing channeled through Eternia's core, and he drove it into the ground that wasn't ground. "I am Fjord Stone. I abandoned my patron, chose my goddess, became a paladin not because destiny demanded it but because I decided it. I anchor this seal in the name of every choice that ever mattered. The void shrieked as reality crystallized around his conviction. Caleb saw the plan immediately, understood its terrible elegance. They would become living seals, their identities the locks, their convictions the keys. He planted his feet in negative space and channeled every ounce of transmutation magic through Eternia's geometric framework. I am Caleb Widogast. I killed my parents, served a monster, and chose redemption not because I deserved it but because my friends believed I could. I anchor this seal in the name of every person who ever changed. Mathematics made manifest, burning equations that insisted on his existence. Jester laughed and cried simultaneously, her creativity exploding into full manifestation. She painted a circle around herself that became real, became permanent, became a declaration of being. I am Jester Lavore. I imagined a god and made him real through sheer belief. If I can create divinity, I can definitely create seals. I anchor this in the name of every silly, joyful, meaningful choice. Color erupted from her position, a chromatic nova that burned through shadow. Beauregard dropped into fighting stance, her monk training and expositor philosophy crystallizing into unshakable foundation. I am Beauregard Lionett. I was an angry kid who became a truth seeker. Not because I'm perfect, because I refuse to stop trying. I anchor this seal in the name of every person who ever kept getting back up. Truth force radiated from her like physical law. Veth held her crossbow and her family's memory like twin shields. I am Veth Brenado. I was cursed, transformed, and fought back to myself. I'm a mother, a wife, a Mighty Nein, and I survived worse than you. I anchor this seal in the name of everyone who ever clawed their way home. Her position became fixed point, immutable reality. Yasha's wings exploded to full span, lightning and flowers intertwined in impossible beauty. I am Yasha Nidoran. I lost myself and found myself and I'm still finding myself. I anchor this seal in the name of everyone who ever chose gentleness and violence both. Storm Force locked her essence into permanent position. Caduceus smiled serenely and planted his staff. I am Caduceus Clay. Death is part of life, endings are part of beginnings, and I'm okay with that. I anchor this seal in the name of every cycle that ever continued despite everything. Life and death spiraled from him, creating stability through acceptance of change. 7 points. 7 anchors. 7 souls declaring their existence against void. The Unnamed One thrashed, its philosophical arguments shattering against lived experience crystallized into magical law. It tried to dissolve their certainties, to point out the logical flaws in their reasoning, to prove that conviction was just biochemistry. But Eternia's magic didn't care about logic. It cared about will. And 7 people who'd survived hell and chosen each other had will enough to move worlds. Skeletor began chanting, his dark magic weaving between their anchor points, using their convictions as foundation for containment matrices that would trap the god in dimensional prison. Hold! He screamed. Just hold for 30 more seconds. The Unnamed One's final attack wasn't physical or magical. It was simple and devastating, it showed them the truth. That they would fail eventually, that their convictions would fade, that heat death awaited all things, that even their victory here was temporary reprieve in an ultimately losing war against entropy. And the Mighty Nein looked at that truth and said collectively, yeah. So what? The seal snapped into place. The Unnamed One shrieked, its form compressing, folding, being forced back into dimensional prison even as it raged against the injustice, that beings so small, so temporary, so utterly insignificant could dare to bind it. That's the thing about us insignificant beings, Fjord said, grinning despite exhaustion. We're really good at doing impossible things. The void collapsed, reality reasserted itself, and the western wing returned to being merely a damaged section of castle rather than philosophical nightmare made manifest. 1 seal complete. 2 gods remaining. The Mighty Nein collapsed in a heap of trembling limbs and ragged breathing as reality finished knitting itself back together around them. The Western Wing's architecture remained scarred, walls bearing shadowy imprints where the Unnamed One's presence had corroded existence. But it was there, solid, following normal physics again. Caleb's hands shook as he fumbled for his component pouch, his mental calculations struggling to process how much magical energy they just expended. Anchoring a seal against a conceptual god while maintaining individual identity had been like holding your breath while someone tried to convince you that breathing was a social construct. Never, Veth gasped, curled into a ball, doing that again. Never. I quit. I'm retiring. Opening a flower shop with Yeza. Selling daisies. Nice, normal, non-nihilistic daisies. Flowers eventually die too, Caduceus pointed out helpfully, though he looked equally exhausted, his pink hair plastered to his forehead with sweat that smelled faintly of ozone and graveyard soil. Everything composts. Including daisies. Especially daisies, actually, they're quite good for the... Caduceus, I love you, but if you mention decomposition right now I will shoot you. That's fair. Jester lay sprawled on her back, staring at the ceiling where normal stone had replaced the void's impossible geometry. Her sketchbook had pages burned through from channeling too much creative force, and her fingers were cramped from painting reality into existence. Guys? I think I just proved art is more powerful than ancient gods. That's so cool. I'm going to paint a commemorative dick about it later. Please do, Beauregard groaned from where she'd face-planted into what used to be floor. Her monk training was the only thing keeping her conscious, that and sheer stubborn refusal to pass out before confirming they'd actually won. Biggest dick you've ever drawn. Mounted in a gallery. Call it, fuck you, existential dread. Skeletor emerged from the shadows where he'd maintained the ritual's outer framework, his theatrical villainy somewhat diminished by genuine exhaustion. Even evil overlords had limits, apparently. His ramskull staff sparked erratically, its power depleted. Well. That was, significantly more traumatic than anticipated. You people actually anchored your souls as dimensional locks while fighting a god that embodies hopelessness. That's either the bravest or stupidest thing I've witnessed in 40 years of villainy, and I once watched He-Man try to fistfight a black hole. How'd that go? Fjord managed, pushing himself to sitting position and immediately regretting it as his entire body informed him that channeling planetary power through a half-orc frame wasn't covered by standard warranties. Poorly for the black hole, actually. He-Man is aggressively optimistic. Skeletor tilted his skull face toward the throne room where sounds of ongoing combat echoed, roars, energy discharges, impacts that shook foundations. Speaking of our insufferably heroic prince, he's still engaging Gygor. The Sorceress battles Serpos in the upper atmosphere. And we have 2 more seals to establish while our anchors can barely stand. Shall we take a brief rest? Perhaps some tea and biscuits while ancient gods destroy civilization. I could actually murder some tea right now, Caduceus said wistfully. Focus, Fjord commanded, though his own vision swam. The star razor felt impossibly heavy in his grip, its seafoam glow dimmed to barely a shimmer. How long were we in there? What's the tactical situation? 43 minutes, Skeletor replied. Which means you have 17 minutes remaining of your hour deadline, and I have delightful news, it gets worse. He gestured dramatically toward the throne room, and holographic displays manifested showing Castle Grayskull's interior schematics. Red indicators spread through the north and east sections like infection. Serpos' serpent thralls have converted approximately 30% of the castle's defenders. They're advancing toward the power core with distressing efficiency. The sorceress is winning her aerial battle, slowly, beautifully, with magnificent light shows, but she cannot abandon the engagement to address the internal threat without allowing Serpos to breach the core directly. Yasha forced herself to her feet through sheer barbarian stubbornness, skeletal wings hanging limp but functional. The Stormlord's distant presence pulsed through her like a heartbeat, offering strength she'd already depleted twice over. Then we stop the thralls. Clear the path. How many are we talking? At current conversion rate? Approximately 200 by the time you reach them, increasing exponentially as they corrupt more defenders. Skeletor's tone carried grudging respect. They're not mindless. Serpos' influence enhances combat capability while suppressing individual will. You'd be fighting Eternia's own elite guard, masters of both technology and combat, with serpentine enhancement. Suicide mission. My favorite kind. Caleb's analytical mind, still reeling from philosophical combat, tried to process tactical solutions and came up empty. 200 enhanced guards between them and the power core, while they were already running on empty, with barely 15 minutes before the ceiling window closed. Even with their Grayskull-enhanced abilities, the mathematics were brutal. We cannot fight through that many opponents quickly enough. We need a different approach. Stealth, misdirection, something that bypasses direct confrontation. Or, Bo countered, her expositor training offering alternative strategies. We don't bypass them. We cure them. If Serpos is channeling through the thralls, there's a connection we can sever. Break the link, free the defenders, turn the tide. Optimistic, Skeletor observed. I like it. Won't work, but I like it. Serpos' corruption operates on a genetic level. It rewrites their base code, turns them into extensions of the serpent god's will. You'd need to either kill the host or somehow transmute corrupted biology back to original state while under combat conditions. The former is easier. We're not killing mind-controlled victims, Fjord said flatly, his paladin oath singing through him despite exhaustion. The Wild Mother's distant whisper carried clear instruction: protect life, even when inconvenient, even when hard, especially when impossible. There's another way. Caleb, your transmutation magic, Grayskull enhanced it, made it work with Eternia's cosmic technology hybrid system. Could you reverse biological corruption if you had a sample to analyze? Caleb's mind raced through possibilities, sifting theory against practice. Transmutation specialized in reshaping matter's fundamental nature, and Eternia's magic operated on geometric principles that made biological manipulation more mathematics than mysticism. If he could isolate the corruption's pattern, create a counter-pattern, broadcast it through. Yes. Maybe. Probably. Possibly catastrophically, but those odds are acceptable given circumstances. He pulled components from his pouch, copper wire, a vial of mercury, his own blood as focusing agent. I would need a living thrall to study. And time I don't have. And concentration under battlefield conditions. And us to buy you that time, Jester finished, already pulling new sketchbook pages from her haversack. Her creativity was depleted but not dead. It would hurt to channel more, but pain was temporary and friends were worth it. We hold them off, you science the snake corruption out of them, we all go home and pretend this was a normal adventure. None of our adventures are normal, Beth pointed out, checking her crossbow's remaining ammunition with professional paranoia. But sure. Let's add, cure serpent god corruption under combat pressure, to our resume. Right between, killed demon prince and survived philosophical debate with nihilism incarnate. A thunderous impact shook the castle, and through the shattered throne room walls, they watched Gygor land a devastating four-armed strike that sent He-Man crashing through the courtyard's outer wall into the desert beyond. The World-Breaker roared triumph and began advancing toward the castle interior, its armored hide barely scratched despite prolonged combat. Oh good, additional complications, Skeletor said cheerfully. Gygor has apparently decided that beating He-Man unconscious is sufficient victory and is now making for the power core. You'll be fighting serpent thralls and avoiding a 40-foot rage monster that can shatter stone with its footsteps. This day just keeps getting better. He-Man's voice roared from the desert, defiant despite damage, and moments later the prince launched back into combat with the kind of aggressive optimism that either inspired heroism or terrified rational observers. The sword of power blazed as he struck Gygor's knee joint with enough force to stagger the god, buying them precious seconds. Then we move now, Fjord decided, because someone had to make command decisions and everyone else was too tired to argue. He grabbed Caleb's shoulder, met his friend's eyes with the intensity of someone who'd saved and been saved too many times to count. You can do this. I've seen you transmute reality itself. Serpent corruption is just Tuesday for you. Caleb wanted to protest that this was nothing like his previous work, that Eternia's magic still felt foreign despite the trials, that he was terrified of failure with stakes this high. Instead, he nodded once. Get me a thrall. Keep me alive for 3 minutes. I'll do the rest. They moved through Castle Grayskull's corridors at a pace somewhere between jog and collapse, following Skeletor's holographic guidance toward where serpent thralls massed near the power core's outer defenses. The architecture around them bore increasing signs of Serpos' influence, scales etching themselves into stone, walls developing serpentine patterns, the air growing humid and thick with the smell of primordial swamps. The first thralls they encountered had been members of Man-at-Arms' elite guard, warriors who defended Eternia against interdimensional invasions and technological terrors. Now their eyes glowed with reptilian luminescence, their skin bore scale patterns that moved independently of flesh beneath, and they hissed in unison as the Mighty Nein entered their corridor. Thralls detected, one spoke in a voice that was partially human, partially serpent, entirely wrong. Dimensional catalysts must not reach the core. Serpos commands. Serpos provides. Serpos transforms. Yeah, Serpos can go fuck himself, Bo replied, and launched herself into combat with the fluid grace of someone too tired to care about self-preservation. The battle was chaos contained in narrow corridors. Thralls moved with enhanced speed and coordination, their technological weapons now firing serpent-shaped energy blasts that corroded whatever they touched. Yasha's skeletal wings provided barely enough room to maneuver, each thunderous punch driving thralls back but never quite down. Serpos' enhancement made them resilient. Fjord's star razor cleaved through their attacks, paladin magic burning away corruption wherever the blade touched but never quite fast enough. Jester painted barriers that held for seconds before serpentine energy dissolved them. Veth's crossbow bolts found gaps in armor, targeting joints and weapons rather than killing shots. Caleb, any time now. Fjord shouted, parrying 3 simultaneous strikes while the Wild Mother's blessing struggled to reach him across dimensional barriers. Caleb had grabbed a thrall, a young woman whose name tag read Tever, and whose terrified human consciousness screamed behind serpentine possession. His transmutation magic dove into her biology, analyzing the corruption pattern with geometric precision. Serpos' influence operated like a virus but with divine coding. It hijacked cellular machinery and rewrote genetic instructions to align with the god's primordial nature. Elegant. Horrifying. And reversible if he could just. There. The pattern's core structure, the mathematical constant that defined serpent at a biological level. He could create an inverse function, a counterpattern that would unwrite the corruption by asserting original genetic identity. But broadcasting it would require channeling through Eternia's planetary systems, using Grayskull's power infrastructure as amplifier, and he'd need to. Gygor's roar echoed through corridors, closer now, accompanied by impacts that suggested He-Man was losing ground. Now would be extremely good. Veth shrieked, barely dodging a serpent blast that melted the wall behind her. Caleb released the thrall, pulled copper wire from his pouch, and began tracing geometric patterns on the floor with desperate speed. Mathematics made manifest, equations that didn't describe reality but commanded it. His hands moved through somatic components while his mind calculated variance ratios and inverse transformations, and finally, he spoke the spell in Zemnian and Eternian simultaneously, a hybrid incantation that tasted like electricity and ancient stone. Corrector der Natur. Correction through geometric inversion. His magic pulsed outward through Grayskull's power conduits, carrying the counterpattern like antibodies through bloodstream, and every thrall in the corridor seized simultaneously. Their serpentine features writhed, scales receding, glowing eyes dimming back to normal colors, and they collapsed gasping and confused and human. Including approximately 180 more throughout the castle, all simultaneously freed. Caleb's nose began bleeding. His vision swam. And he grinned with exhausted triumph. Got them. You beautiful genius bastard, Bo laughed, helping him stay upright. Now let's go save a power core before the giant rage monster gets there. They ran, exhausted and battered and somehow still functioning, through Grayskull's depths toward the chamber where all of Eternia's power converged, and where Serpos waited. The power core chamber defied mortal comprehension in ways that made even the trial spaces seem quaint. It was simultaneously vast and intimate, ancient and newborn, technological and mystical without contradiction. The walls were crystalline circuitry that pulsed with rhythms matching planetary rotation, the floor was polished obsidian that reflected not light but potential futures, and at the chamber's exact center floated a sphere of pure energy. White gold radiance that sang with the fundamental frequency of Eternia itself. This was what powered He-Man's transformations, what maintained dimensional stability, what kept civilization from sliding backward into Preternia's chaos. And coiled around it like a lover's embrace was Serpos. The Great Serpent had abandoned its kilometers-long cosmic form for something more contained but no less terrible. 50 feet of scales that absorbed light and reflected impossibility, eyes that had witnessed the birth of consciousness and found it disappointing, and a presence that made reality feel thin, as if the god's mere existence wore holes through the fabric separating dimensions. Where its body touched the power core's sphere, corruption spread like frost across glass, transforming white gold into sickly green-black that pulsed with primordial hunger. The sorceress hung in the air opposite the serpent, her form blazing with Grayskull's light channeled to its absolute limit. Her cobra-headed headdress had been replaced by a crown of pure luminescence, her staff had become a spear of solidified magic, and golden blood, definitely blood now, not metaphor, seeped from wounds where Serpos's reality-corroding venom had struck her. She was magnificent and terrible and clearly losing. You cannot win, Keeper. Serpos's voice was tectonic and ancient and amused in the way apex predators are amused by struggling prey. I am first consciousness, original thought, the serpent who taught your ancestors to question their gods. This power you guard. It is mine by right of primacy. I existed before Grayskull. Before the elders. Before the concept of before. Your light is temporary aberration in eternal darkness. Then let me be temporary, the sorceress replied, her voice strained but unbroken, and bright, and defiant of your eternal bullshit. The elders sealed you for a reason, old serpent. Not because you were powerful, power they respected. But because you were boring. Primordial chaos is easy. Any idiot with sufficient age can claim to predate meaning. Building civilization. That takes actual work. Serpos struck with speed that shouldn't exist in something so massive, fangs that dripped reality poison lunging for the sorceress's throat. She barely deflected with her spear, the impact sending shockwaves that cracked the obsidian floor, and Caleb's enhanced magical senses detected the truth. She had maybe 2 more exchanges before exhaustion or corruption claimed her. We need to help her, Fjord said, though his own exhaustion made the statement somewhat aspirational. The Star Razor felt like it weighed more than his entire body, the Wild Mother's blessing stretched so thin across dimensions that he could barely feel her presence. Caleb, can you transmute the corruption like you did with the thralls? Different scale entirely, Caleb gasped, his mind still reeling from the previous working. Curing 200 people had been difficult. Reversing corruption on a planetary power source actively being poisoned by a god. The mathematics are, theoretically possible but practically suicidal. I would need to channel through the core itself, use its power as amplifier, and if I miscalculate even slightly, the feedback would either kill me or transform me into something that used to be Caleb Widogast. So standard operating procedure, Beth said with the kind of gallows humor that came from too many near-death experiences. We distract the snake, you do the wizard thing, we all pretend this was the plan. Yasha's skeletal wings spread despite her exhaustion, lightning crackling weakly between feathers. The Stormlord's rage burned in her chest, distant but absolute, the divine fury of storms against the primordial serpent that claimed to predate weather itself. I'll take the first strike. He knows I'm Stormlord touched. That should get his attention. Wait, Fjord started, but Yasha was already moving. She launched herself with barbarian speed enhanced by divine fury, skeletal wings propelling her toward Serpos' head with both fists drawn back. Her roar was thunder-given voice, and when she struck the serpent's skull with every ounce of strength she possessed, the impact was lightning meeting scale with force that cracked obsidian flooring. Serpos' head barely moved. The god's eyes, vast and ancient and infinitely patient, swiveled to regard her with the interest an elephant might show to an attacking mouse. Ah! Storm-touched child. Your god is infant compared to me. I swam through oceans before the Stormlord learned to whisper through clouds. Your fury is adorable. Then Serpos moved, and Yasha discovered that primordial gods didn't fight, they educated. The serpent's tail whipped with casual force, catching her mid-flight and slamming her through 3 crystal pillars before she crashed into the chamber wall hard enough to leave an impact crater. She slumped, conscious but barely, lightning flickering weakly around her broken form. Yasha. Jester's scream was equal parts rage and terror. Her creativity exploded outward in painted constructs, guardian angels, protective barriers, healing sigils that manifested as actual magical effects. She ran toward her fallen friend, her cleric instincts overriding tactical sense, and Caduceus was right behind her, death and life magic already reaching to assess damage. Which left Fjord, Bo, Veth, and Caleb facing a god that had just demonstrated the vast gulf between, enhanced by trials, and, older than language. Subtle distraction, Bo deadpanned, her monk training calculating approach vectors and coming up with nothing good. Really nailed the subtle part there. Serpos' attention had fully left the sorceress now, regarding the Mighty Nein with something approaching curiosity. The dimensional catalysts. You sealed the Unnamed One. Impressive for mayflies. You cured my thralls, clever. And now you stand before me, exhausted and outmatched, believing you can repeat your victory. The serpent's laugh was countenance grinding. You succeeded against Shadow because philosophy can be argued. Against me? I am biology, evolution, the original predator. I am not abstract. I simply am, and I am superior. Yeah, we've met your type before, Fjord said, memories of Ukeoto arising with bitter clarity. Serpent gods with superiority complexes weren't exactly novel experiences. Lots of big talk about primacy and power. Usually ends with them sealed in prison or worse. You dare compare me to that pathetic oceanic worm? Serpos' scales rattled with offense. Ukeotoa is to me as bacteria is to you, distant descendant, simplified, diminished. I taught the first serpents to be serpents. I am the template from which all snake gods derive. And yet, Caleb said, his mind racing through calculations even as he edged toward the power core, you're here, corrupting a power source rather than simply taking it. Which suggests you cannot directly consume Grayskull's energy. You need to transform it first, make it compatible with your primordial nature. That's not superiority, that's evolutionary specialization making you vulnerable to systems you didn't anticipate. Serpos' eyes narrowed. Clever monkey. But cleverness without power is just noise. The serpent struck, not at Caleb but at the power core itself, driving fangs deep into the white gold sphere. Corruption flooded faster now, green-black spreading like infection, and the entire castle shuddered as dimensional stability wavered. Above them, beyond the chamber, Gygor's roar suggested the World-Breaker had finally broken past He-Man's defenses and was approaching. No time for subtlety. No time for perfect calculations. Caleb ran. He sprinted toward the power core while Bo and Veth provided covering fire, monk strikes and crossbow bolts that bounced off Serpos' scales but at least drew attention. Fjord intercepted the serpent's lunging strike with the star razor, the blade's seafoam luminescence clashing against reality poison in a shower of sparks that burned like stars dying. He was thrown back, armor cracked, but the distraction bought Caleb seconds. Precious, suicidal seconds. Caleb slammed both hands against the power core's sphere, his transmutation magic diving into its structure with reckless abandon. The energy was overwhelming, not just power but power, the fundamental force that maintained a planet's reality. It tasted like lightning and ancient stone and the breath of sleeping gods, and it was being poisoned at the source by corruption that operated on genetic divine principles he barely understood. But he understood mathematics. And Eternia's magic was mathematics made real. He began the working, fingers tracing geometric patterns in the air while his mind calculated inverse functions at speeds that made his nose bleed and his vision fragment. The counter-pattern to Serpos' corruption wasn't a spell, it was an argument, a mathematical proof that stated, original state is more stable than corrupted state, therefore reality should revert to stability. The core's energy responded, curious and immense. It recognized his intent if not his method, and it offered power, so much power, enough to transmute continents, enough to reshape reality itself. Caleb took what he needed and channeled it through frameworks he'd learned in Grayskull's trials, hybrid magic that was part arcane theory and part cosmic engineering. No! Serpos shrieked, finally recognizing the threat. Insect! You cannot. I absolutely can. Caleb shouted back, and activated the transmutation. White gold light exploded through the chamber, burning away corruption like dawn-dissolving night. Serpos' venom, his reality poison, his primordial corruption, all of it encountered the mathematical certainty of inverse transformation and simply stopped being. The power core blazed pure again, its fundamental frequency restored, and the feedback surge of purified energy washed through Castle Grayskull like a tidal wave of renewal. The sorceress, her wounds instantly healed, raised her spear with renewed strength. Now. Skeletor materialized from shadows, he'd been maintaining the ritual framework this entire time, dark magic prepared and waiting for this exact moment. Second seal. Anchors, if you're still conscious, now would be spectacular. The Mighty Nein, battered and bleeding and somehow still standing, locked into formation. 7 points. 7 anchors. Same configuration as against the Unnamed One, but this time with the power core's energy flooding through them, amplifying their convictions into forces capable of binding gods. Fjord, I am choice against predestination. Caleb, I am transformation against stagnation. Jester, I am creativity against ancient patterns. Beauregard, I am truth against primordial lies. Veth, I am survival against superior force. Yasha, barely conscious, I am thunder against the serpent. Caduceus, I am the cycle against the eternal. The seal manifested as geometric cage, mathematical certainty made physical, and Serpos thrashed against it with fury that shook dimensions. You cannot. I am first. I am original. I predate your laws. Then you're outdated, the sorceress said coldly, and drove her spear of solidified light straight through the serpent's skull. Not killing, gods didn't die that easily. But wounding, binding, forcing compliance. The seal snapped shut. Serpos compressed, folded, was forced back into dimensional prison even as it screamed its ancient rage. 2 seals complete. 1 god remaining. And Gygor the World-Breaker had just entered the chamber. Gygor's entrance wasn't dramatic, it was geological. The World-Breaker didn't walk so much as the ground experienced his footsteps as localized tectonic events. Each step cracked obsidian flooring, sent shockwaves rippling through crystalline walls, and the beast's mere presence made the air feel heavy with the weight of mountains deciding to move. Up close, in the power core chamber's confines, the god was impossibly massive, 40 feet of muscle, armor, and primordial fury that shouldn't fit in the space but did anyway, because reality bent around beings this fundamental. He-Man stumbled in behind the god, his transformed state flickering like a dying flame. The sword of power still blazed in his grip, but blood, red and too human, streamed from wounds that would have killed normal men 20 times over. His armor was shattered, his legendary strength clearly depleted, and when he met the sorceress's eyes, the message was clear: I slowed it down. That's all I could do. Power. Gygor's voice wasn't speech but force-given sound, each syllable a physical impact. Mine. Always mine. Before Grayskull. Before elders. Power knows strongest. I am strongest. The god's 4 arms reached toward the power core with movements that seemed slow until you realized each slow gesture covered dozens of feet in milliseconds. The sorceress threw up barriers, crystalline shields that had withstood dimensional invasions and reality storms, and Gygor shattered them with casual backhanded strikes that sent fragments embedding themselves in walls. It's learning from He-Man's fighting style, Beauregard observed with the detached clarity of someone too exhausted for panic. Her expositor training cataloged Gygor's movements, identified patterns borrowed from He-Man's technique but enhanced by divine strength and forearmed advantage. Every exchange they had, it was studying him. It knows how he moves, how he thinks, how he fights. Then we don't fight like He-Man, Fjord said, his tactical mind pivoting despite exhaustion that made standing feel like victory. The Wild Mother's presence pulsed weakly through his paladin oath. She was still there, still offering strength, just stretched so thin across dimensional distances that each blessing felt rationed. He-Man's a frontal assault fighter. Strong, fast, honorable. We're sneaky bastards who survived by being smarter than things that could kill us. Speak for yourself on the smart part, Beth muttered, but she was already moving, crossbow tracking for structural weaknesses. Gygor's armor looked natural, but armor was armor. It had joints, gaps, places where protection gave way to mobility. I can see seams along the shoulder joints. If we can compromise its range of motion. Gygor's roar cut her off. Not attacking them specifically, just expressing its nature, pure rage-given voice, and the shockwave was physical force that shattered 3 more crystal pillars and sent everyone who wasn't magically anchored sprawling. The power core's sphere flickered, its white gold energy dimming as Gygor's presence began affecting it through proximity alone. This wasn't corruption like Serpos, or philosophical assault like the Unnamed One. This was simpler and more terrifying. Gygor existed, and reality struggled to accommodate that existence without breaking. Caleb pushed himself upright, mathematical mind already calculating impossibilities. His transmutation magic was depleted from purging Serpos's corruption, his component pouch nearly empty, and his body informed him through screaming nerves that channeling more Eternia power would likely kill him. But death was just another variable, and the equation here was simple. Stop Gygor or everyone died anyway, so personal survival became an irrelevant factor. The armor is part of its biology. Not grafted, grown. I can see the seams Veth mentioned, but they're not weaknesses. They're designed flex points that allow the armor to reconfigure based on threat assessment. So it gets stronger the more we hurt it. Jester's voice carried the edge of hysteria, though her hand still moved through cleric gestures, maintaining healing magic on Yasha who remained conscious through sheer barbarian stubbornness. That's not fair. That's the opposite of fair. Fair is weak concept, Gygor observed, smashing through another of the sorceress's barriers. Strong survives. Weak feeds strong. This is law before laws. Yasha tried to stand, failed, tried again with skeletal wings providing leverage, and managed something resembling vertical despite bones that ground against each other wrong. Lightning flickered around her in weak pulses, the Stormlord's blessing struggling to reach her but refusing to abandon his chosen. Not law, she gasped. Just excuse for bullies. Gygor's attention swiveled toward her, for arms flexing, and for a moment the god seemed genuinely confused. You are broken. Why stand? Survival means accepting defeat. Survival means, getting back up, Yasha growled, and channeled everything she had left, not into attack but into defiance, into standing despite damage, into proving that strength wasn't just about muscle and rage. Her wings blazed with skeletal radiance, lightning wreathing her broken form, and she raised one fist in challenge. I've been broken before. I got better. You're just, next thing to survive. The World-Breaker roared and charged. He-Man intercepted with speed born of desperation, the sword of power blazing as he drove the blade toward Gygor's chest in a strike that would have bisected mountains. The god caught the sword in two hands, stopped the strike through pure strength, and with its other two arms delivered a combination of blows that sent He-Man crashing through the chamber wall into corridors beyond. No more interruptions, Skeletor's voice echoed through the chamber, and the villain materialized in multiple shadow forms around Gygor's perimeter. World-Breaker, meet the master of evil. I've studied you, old beast. Know your patterns. And unlike our heroic friend with the sword, I don't fight fair. Dark magic lashed out from 7 different angles, not attacking Gygor directly but targeting the floor beneath its feet, the air around its head, the space behind its knees. Reality warped under Skeletor's assault, and for precious seconds, Gygor stumbled. Third seal. The sorceress shouted, her form blazing as she drew on Grayskull's power core directly, channeling its energy into ritual frameworks that Skeletor had been weaving throughout their entire desperate battle. Anchors. Final positions. We seal it now or we don't seal it at all. The Mighty Nein locked into formation one last time. 7 points around a god that embodied pure physical dominance, 7 souls who'd already anchored 2 seals and whose individual essences were fragmenting under the strain. Caleb could feel his identity wavering. Was he Bren or Caleb, transmuter or murderer, student or survivor? The distinctions blurred as he channeled Eternia's power through frameworks that were never meant for mortal use. But they'd done impossible things before. Fjord planted the star razor point first into obsidian flooring. I am choice against domination. His paladin oath blazed, the Wild Mother's blessing surging through him one final time. She'd been listening, gathering strength, preparing for this moment. I rejected Yukeotoa's strength. I chose my goddess. Power doesn't mean ownership. Caleb's hands wove geometric patterns that left afterimages in reality itself. I am transformation against static force. His transmutation magic, Grayskull enhanced and reality adjacent, insisted that nothing was permanent, not even primordial gods. Matter changes. Energy shifts. Even you can be reshaped. Jester painted with blood from her own wounds, she'd learned in the trials that creativity fueled by sacrifice carried extra weight. I am imagination against inevitability. Her art manifested as actual restructuring of probability, making unlikely outcomes possible. You say might makes right? I say we make our own right. Beauregard's fists blazed with truth force as she struck the ground in rhythm with her heartbeat. I am earned wisdom against inherited power. Her monk training and cobalt soul philosophy crystallized into law. You were born strong. Great. We became strong. That matters more. Veth's crossbow aimed not at Gygor but at the spaces between, the dimensional seams where reality met ritual. I am adaptability against raw force. Her survivor's instinct weaponized into principle. You're bigger. We're smarter. You're stronger. We're sneakier. We win because we refuse to lose. Yasha could barely stand, but her skeletal wings spread wide regardless, lightning and flowers intertwined in defiant beauty. I am gentleness and fury both. The Stormlord's rage and Zwala's memory combined into something greater than either. You're all rage. That's just half of strength. I'm whole, and you're not. Caduceus smiled his serene death cleric smile, staff planted firmly despite trembling hands. I am the cycle against the eternal. Life and death spiraled from him, creating balance through acceptance. Everything ends, friend. Even gods. Especially gods who forget that strength includes knowing when to rest. 7 anchors. 7 souls declaring that primordial might could be bound by mortal will. Gygor thrashed, its 4 arms tearing through reality itself trying to break free, but Skeletor's dark magic and the sorceress's light wove together, opposed forces unified by necessity. Creating containment matrices that transformed the Mighty Nein's convictions into dimensional prison. No. I am strongest. Power cannot be bound by weak. We're not weak, Fjord said, grinning through blood and exhaustion. We're just really, really stubborn. The seal began manifesting, geometric cage wrapping around divine fury, and Gygor's roar shook dimensions as it fought against inevitable containment. The god's armor reconfigured frantically, searching for weakness in the magical framework, finding none because the weakness wasn't structural. It was philosophical. Gygor believed in absolute strength, and the Mighty Nein proved that strength came in forms beyond muscle. He-Man stumbled back into the chamber, barely conscious, and drove the sword of power into the ritual's focal point. By the power of Grayskull. His transformation blazed one final time, channeling every ounce of planetary energy into the sealing matrix. I have the power. The combined force, 7 anchors, 2 magic users, 1 planetary champion, and the power core itself, crashed down on Gygor with the weight of universal law declaring, "You are bound." The World-Breaker shrieked, compressed, folded, was forced back into dimensional prison even as it raged against the injustice that beings so small could dare to contain it. The seal snapped shut. 3 seals complete. 3 gods imprisoned. The Mighty Nein collapsed simultaneously, their anchor bond dissolving, their individual identities reasserting themselves after being stretched across dimensional frameworks. Caleb's last conscious thought was relief that he still knew his own name. Jester's was wondering if anyone would paint a commemorative portrait. Fjord's was gratitude to the Wild Mother for not abandoning him. Bo's was smug satisfaction. Veth's was determination to hug her family. Yasha's was peaceful acceptance. Caduceus's was wondering about tea. They'd done it. Saved a world they didn't know, bound gods they'd accidentally freed, proven that even cosmic mistakes could be fixed through stubbornness and friendship. The sorceress looked down at 7 unconscious heroes and smiled beneath her cobra headdress. Well done, Mighty Nein. Eternia will remember this. He-Man, powering down to Adam's baseline form, nodded agreement. They earned their legend. Skeletor, exhausted and theatrical to the end, managed one final laugh. Yes, yes, very heroic. Now someone heal them before they die and ruin this touching moment. I have a reputation for villainy to maintain, and saving dimensional travelers looks bad on my resume. The power core pulsed with restored white gold brilliance, and Castle Grayskull began to heal. Consciousness returned to Caleb Widogast in stages, each one more painful than the last. First came awareness of body, every nerve screaming that channeling planetary power through mortal frame had consequences beyond simple exhaustion. Then came memory, dimensional travel, ancient gods, philosophical combat, mathematical sealing rituals. Finally came environment. He was lying on something soft that smelled faintly of ozone and ancient stone, in a room where gravity felt correct for the first time since arriving in Eternia, and someone nearby was making tea. Caduceus. Caleb's voice came out as gravel, his throat raw from screaming incantations in hybrid languages. Good morning, the furball replied with characteristic serenity, though his pink hair was still matted with dried blood and his robes bore scorch marks that would never fully wash out. Well, afternoon technically. You've been unconscious for 7 hours. The sorceress says that's actually impressive. Most people who anchor dimensional seals stay down for days. Want some tea? It's not my blend, but Eternia has interesting herbs. Very geometric flavors. Caleb accepted the cup with trembling hands, sipped, and discovered that geometric flavors was disturbingly accurate. The tea tasted like drinking mathematics, which shouldn't be possible but apparently was in a world where cosmic technology and mysticism were the same thing. The others? Alive. Recovering. Jester's already painting commemorative dicks on the castle walls. The sorceress finds it charming, which tells you something about Cosmic Guardian's sense of humor. Fjord and Bo are with He-Man learning about Eternia's history. Veth's disassembling and reassembling Man-at-Arms' technology because she's constitutionally incapable of not understanding how things work. Yasha's in the gardens with some giant bees, which is either therapeutic or concerning, hard to say. The room they occupied was clearly a recovery ward, crystalline walls that pulsed with gentle healing frequencies, beds that adjusted to optimal support automatically, and windows showing Castle Grayskull's courtyard where repair constructs worked to fix battle damage. The Skull Castle's aesthetic remained unsettling, but somehow less ominous now. Protective rather than threatening. A fortress that had proven worthy of its defenders. The sorceress materialized in her signature flash of light, her cobra headdress gleaming. The golden blood had been cleaned away, her robes pristine, but Caleb's enhanced senses detected lingering exhaustion beneath the cosmic facade. Even guardians of reality had limits. Caleb widowgasped. You're awake. Good. We have matters to discuss before you return home. Return home, Caleb repeated, the words carrying more weight than simple syllables. The portal we came through. Collapsed when you sealed the gods, yes. But that's not a problem. The sorceress gestured, and holographic displays manifested showing dimensional mathematics that made Caleb's transmutation training feel inadequate. The 3 seals you helped create are anchored between Eternia and Exandria. They require both worlds to maintain stability, which means a permanent dimensional bridge exists between our realities now. Controlled, regulated, but permanent. Your world and mine are cosmically linked. That sounds like it could be extremely complicated, Caduceus observed mildly, pouring more geometric tea. It will be, the sorceress agreed without concern. But complications are better than extinction. The gods are sealed, both worlds are safe, and the Mighty Nein have earned a place in Eternia's histories as the dimensional travelers who helped save everything. She produced a crystalline object. Part technology, part magic, entirely beyond Caleb's immediate understanding. This is a wayfinder. It will allow you to open controlled portals between Exandria and Eternia when needed. Consider it a gift, and a responsibility. Our worlds are allies now, whether we intended it or not. Fjord entered the recovery ward with Beauregard, both looking exhausted but functional. The half-orc's armor had been repaired by Man-at-Arms' technology, not replaced but enhanced, circuits integrated into metal that would have made Pumet's soul weep with envy. Bo wore new wraps gifted by Eternian monks, blue fabric that shimmered with protective enchantments. We just had a very surreal conversation with a prince who turns into a superhero by yelling at his castle, Fjord reported. He wants to know if Exandria has similar champions. I didn't know how to explain that we just, kind of stumbled into heroism through poor life choices and stubbornness. That's most heroes, the sorceress said with what might have been amusement. Adam, He-Man, was a spoiled prince before the sword of power chose him. Greatness isn't about starting perfect. It's about choosing to continue despite imperfection. Jester bounded in trailing paint fumes, her sketchbook clutched triumphantly. I made art. So much art. The guards thought I was vandalizing but the sorceress said it was adding character, and now there are blessed dicks all over Castle Grayskull. This is the best interdimensional crisis ever. Veth followed more sedately, her tinkerer's tools gleaming with new additions, Eternian technology integrated into Exandrian craftsmanship, because innovation recognized no dimensional boundaries. Man-at-Arms offered me a job. Can you imagine? Me, working for actual military geniuses with actual resources instead of jury-rigging explosives from alchemy supplies in the back of a cart. I politely declined because Yeza would kill me, but it was tempting. Yasha entered last, moving carefully but healed, skeletal wings folded peacefully against her back. She carried flowers that didn't exist in Exandria, crystalline petals that chimed softly, grown in Grayskull's impossible gardens. For Zwala's grave, she explained quietly. The sorceress says they'll bloom eternally. Seemed appropriate. The Mighty Nein, reunited and recovering, faced the cosmic guardian who'd overseen their desperate battle. 7 people who'd accidentally released ancient gods and then fixed their mistake through combat, philosophy, mathematics, and sheer refusal to accept defeat. So, Beauregard said, because someone had to address the obvious question. We just created a permanent dimensional link between 2 worlds by accident. Is that going to cause problems? Because our track record with accidentally causing problems is, extensive. Problems, yes. Also opportunities. The sorceress's tone suggested she'd already calculated multiple futures and found them acceptable. Exandria's gods will eventually notice the connection. Eternia's masters, heroic and villainous, will grow curious about your world. Trade, conflict, alliance, all of it becomes possible. But that's tomorrow's concern. Today, you should rest, recover, and prepare for return. What about Skeletor? Jester asked with genuine curiosity. Is he going to be okay? He helped save the world, but he kept saying it was embarrassing for his villain reputation. Skeletor is fine. Already plotting his next scheme to conquer Eternia, which is comfortingly normal. The sorceress's cobra headdress tilted with what might have been fondness. He's theatrical evil, not existential. We can work with theatrical. And despite his protests, I believe today taught him that villainy doesn't preclude heroism when stakes demand it. Man-at-arms entered carrying equipment. 7 devices that resembled communicators but functioned as dimensional anchors. For emergencies, he explained in his gruff, practical way. If Eternia faces threats beyond our capacity, or if Exandria requires aid we can provide, these will allow contact. We're allies now. Allies help each other. He-Man, Adam, really, in his baseline princely form, appeared in the doorway with a smile that managed to be both humble and confident. You fought like champions. Not because you were born to it, but because you chose to. That's rarer and more valuable than inherited power. He clasped forearms with Fjord in warrior's greeting. If you ever need Eternia's aid, call. We owe you 3 gods worth of debt. And if you ever need to accidentally release ancient evils and then fix your mistakes, Fjord replied with dry humor, you know who to contact. We're experts at that specific skill set. The sorceress raised her staff, and the power core's energy began gathering, not for combat but for creation, weaving a portal that would bridge dimensions properly this time, sending them home to Exandria. Step through when ready. Your world awaits, and I suspect your friends there have questions about your 7-hour absence that became days in your experience. Time moves strangely between dimensions. The portal manifested as a doorway of white gold light that showed glimpses of familiar terrain, the ruins beneath Rosohna where this had started, but stable now, safe, just another archaeological curiosity rather than dimensional crisis waiting to happen. Caleb looked at his friends, at these people who'd become family through shared trauma and impossible victories, and felt profound gratitude that whatever entity-governed coincidence had thrown them together. We should go home, he said simply. Before we accidentally save another world. Too late, Caduceus observed cheerfully. We already did that. But yeah, let's go home anyway. I miss our world's decomposition rates. Very comforting. They gathered their equipment. Enhanced by Eternian technology, blessed by cosmic guardians, marked by battle against primordial gods. Fjord carried the Wayfinder carefully, understanding its weight as both gift and responsibility. Jester clutched her sketchbook filled with interdimensional art. Veth had schematics that would revolutionize Exandrian engineering if she ever shared them. Bo possessed combat techniques from Eternian monks. Yasha held flowers for a grave. Caduceus had geometric tea recipes. Caleb's mind contained mathematical frameworks that would take years to fully understand. They'd arrived in Eternia as refugees from dimensional accident. They departed as legends who'd helped seal 3 gods and forge alliance between worlds. One question, Veth said as they approached the portal. Are we going to tell people about this? Because, we accidentally went to another dimension, released 3 ancient gods, fought philosophical nihilism and primordial serpents and rage incarnate, then sealed them all with math and stubbornness. Sounds insane even for us. We'll tell the truth, Fjord decided. Just, maybe start with the less insane parts and work up to it. Tactical honesty. That's just lying with extra steps, Bo pointed out. Exactly. They stepped through the portal together, 7 souls who'd proven that even cosmic mistakes could be corrected, that mortal will could bind gods, that friendship was stronger than primordial force, and that the Mighty Nein's capacity for chaos extended across dimensional boundaries. Behind them, Castle Grayskull stood vigilant, its defenders waving farewell, its power core pulsing with renewed strength. The 3 seals held firm, gods imprisoned properly this time, but the dimensional bridge remained, permanent testimony to the day Exandria and Eternia became allies. The sorceress watched them disappear, then turned to Adam. They'll be back. Their kind always finds their way to crisis, and crisis always finds its way to heroes. Looking forward to it, Adam grinned. They make things interesting. The portal closed, the chamber quieted, and Castle Grayskull returned to its eternal watch. But across dimensions, in ruins beneath Rosohna, 7 people tumbled out of white gold light into familiar darkness, home at last. Jester immediately pulled out her holy symbol. Traveler. Traveler, are you there? We have the best story. The traveler's presence flooded back, relief and curiosity and barely contained glee. Jester. Where have you been? You vanished for 30 seconds and came back radiating cosmic power and smelling like ancient magic. What did you do? 30 seconds. Caleb checked his chronometer, confirmed the time differential, felt his transmutation training rebel against the implications. We were gone for nearly 12 hours subjective time, but here. Time moves strangely between dimensions. They all quoted the sorceress simultaneously, then laughed with exhausted hysteria. They climbed out of the ruins, emerged into Rosohna's perpetual darkness, and by unspoken agreement headed toward the nearest tavern. Some stories required alcohol before telling. This was definitely one of them. As they walked through Zorhasian streets, Caleb felt the Wayfinder pulse gently in his pack, reminder that they could return to Eternia if needed, that their worlds were connected now, that their mistake had become bridge. He'd spent years trying to fix his past. Today he'd learned that sometimes fixing mistakes meant preventing futures where those mistakes destroyed everything. It was progress. Weird, interdimensional, God-sealing progress, but progress nonetheless. Hey Caleb. Jester tugged his sleeve, her eyes bright with manic creativity. Do you think Castle Grayskull has a gift shop? Because I really want a commemorative skull mug. I will personally fund a return trip if it means you get that mug, Caleb replied seriously. That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, Jester declared. It wasn't meant to be romantic, it was meant to be practical. Too late, it's romantic now. The Mighty Nein continued toward the tavern, bickering and laughing and alive, their legend grown by another impossible chapter. And in Castle Grayskull, the sorceress smiled, knowing that when crisis next threatened either world, 7 stubborn souls would answer the call. Because that's what heroes did, accidentally, chaotically, but reliably. Always. The ruins beneath Rosohna were sealed properly 3 days later, after extensive investigation by both the Bright Queen's scholars and the Cobalt Soul's expositors. The dimensional door that had started everything was classified as catastrophically dangerous but currently stable, which was about as good as it got for ancient magical artifacts connected to other realities. Beauregard filed a report that somehow made interdimensional god sealing sound routine. Caleb provided mathematical proofs that the seals would hold. The Wayfinder was registered as sanctioned magical artifact requiring Mighty Nein consensus for activation. Life returned to something approximating normal, insofar as the Mighty Nein's lives were ever normal. But sometimes, when Fjord prayed to the Wild Mother, he felt echoes of Eternia's planetary consciousness, reminder that his goddess now touched two worlds. When Caleb worked transmutation magic, geometric precision crept into his spell forms, gifts from Grayskull's trials. Jester's art manifested with slightly more reality than before, creativity weaponized by cosmic enhancement. Bow's strikes carried truth force that made lies physically uncomfortable. Veth's engineering incorporated principles that man-at-arms would recognize. Yasha's lightning smelled faintly of ancient flowers. Caduceus's tea occasionally tasted geometric. They'd been changed by Eternia, marked by their battle against primordial forces, and they wore those changes like honors earned through impossible odds. The Wayfinder sat in Caleb's tower, in a vault protected by every security measure he could devise, waiting for the day when Eternia called for aid or Exandria needed allies beyond their world. That day would come, crisis always found heroes, and heroes always answered. But for now, the Mighty Nein had earned rest. They'd accidentally released 3 ancient gods and saved 2 worlds through stubbornness, friendship, and refusal to accept that mistakes were irreparable. They'd proven that even cosmic catastrophes could be fixed if you had the right combination of chaos, competence, and conviction. And they'd done it together, which was really the only way the Mighty Nein knew how to do anything. In Castle Grayskull, the Sorceress maintained her eternal vigil, 3 seals pulsing steadily, dimensional bridge stable. He-Man stood ready to defend Eternia against whatever came next. Man-at-Arms continued his technological innovations. Skeletor plotted his next theatrical scheme. And across dimensional boundaries, 7 souls who'd become legends in 2 worlds continued their adventures, knowing that if ancient gods ever woke again, they'd just have to seal them. Again. Because that's what the Mighty Nein did. They fixed their mistakes, saved the day, and somehow made it look like chaotic accident rather than desperate heroism. Every single time. With great power comes great responsibility. More stories await.